Alright guys, in today's video I'm going to melt down some scrap aluminum with my Vevor 12 kg propane furnace. I am just getting home from work and it is a beautiful day outside to be doing just that. If you're new to my channel, I turn pieces of foam into solid aluminum, and that's what I have here. I have a piece of foam that I carved out with my CNC machine. Let me show you how I made it. I started out with a piece of polystyrene XPS foam. I then carved out the pattern with my Fox Alien CNC router. I then sprayed it down with some soapy water before applying some joint compound to the foam. I mixed up some joint compound with some water and put it in a separate container. Then I spread it all along the top of the foam. You really want to try to move around the plaster to really try to get it into the carving that you carved into that foam. I like to use a little puffer to assist the plaster in moving around the pattern and really try to get it inside of those little carving locations that you carved out with your CNC. And because you added that soapy water in the beginning, it helps release the surface tension and really helps the plaster sink in. Now before we actually start to melt the aluminum, I need to make a mold. This metal container is the one I usually use, but it seems like it's a little bit too small for this foam pattern. So I'm going to have to find something else, and I don't have another metal container, but I do have plastic 5-gallon buckets. And yes, I know using a plastic bucket when melting metal is not something I should be using, but it's the only thing I have. Now, I put in about 1 inch of sand into the bottom because I didn't want to put the foam pattern directly on the bottom, which is the plastic bucket. And that will for sure melt. In all reality, you always want to put a barrier of sand between your pattern and the bottom. So this is what they call the lost foam casting process. You find a container, you put the foam pattern in the container, and you fill it up completely to the top with dry sand. Yes, dry sand, not wet. Now, because I was still too tall for the 5-gallon bucket, I had a piece that I cut off of another 5-gallon bucket to extend it. And this is the pouring cup. This is where I poured the molten metal into. And now we're going to be starting to melt that scrap aluminum. And I'm going to be using the Vevor 12 kg propane furnace. Now that I'm getting set up, I need to connect the propane hose to the propane tank. And I always like to use cardboard underneath of that crucible, in between the crucible and the plinth on the bottom. In most cases, it helps prevent it from sticking, meaning when you lift out the crucible from the furnace, the block underneath of it does not come out with it. Now in today's case, this is going to be a full crucible, so it's going to be pretty heavy. Now before opening up your propane tank, make sure both of your fuel shutoff valves are in the off position on the furnace. Then open up the gas on the propane tank and then adjust your fuel regulator. I like to start it off at 5 psi. Once that is all set, we're going to head back to the propane tank. We're going to put one hand on the fuel valve and we're going to light a fire in the furnace to get it started. I'm using a mini propane torch to start that fire. Now that the propane furnace is lit and fired up, we have to wait a little bit for it to get to melting temperature in order to start melting aluminum. But first, I just want to show you guys, this propane furnace comes with a stainless steel braided fuel line. Most propane furnaces don't come with this. And if you get a little bit of a splash of metal come out, the stainless steel definitely helps protect it. So I'm going to check the temperature of the furnace using my infrared thermometer. Now it's not quite up to melting temperature, but it is 946, 1000 degrees Fahrenheit, which is close. So I'm going to start adding some of this scrap aluminum that I have in this pile. I do have a lot of aluminum here. I think I was going to melt all of it today, but unfortunately the sun did start going down, but I'm going to melt quite a bit of it. So let's go to the furnace and put this aluminum in it and start melting. And the convenient thing is it fits right in the top. So I don't have to worry about opening up the lid, putting it in, losing the heat from the propane furnace. It works out perfectly. And oh yeah, I have to mute the volume in parts of this video because I did speed it up. And when I speed up the video, it kind of makes it sound really bad. So we are going to continue just melting down aluminum pieces. And again, I have tons of it here. But I'm just going to let you guys know ahead of time, this one piece I'm putting in right here is kind of a bad idea. And you're going to see shortly why and what happens. Tons of smoke. Definitely be wearing some sort of respirator or some sort of mask to not breathe this stuff in. And it's got silicone on it. I was not even thinking when I grabbed this piece of aluminum. This is one of the spots that I had to mute the video because it was extremely loud. Now, because of all that silicone, I now have a lot of slag that I need to remove off the top of that puddle of aluminum inside that crucible. So I'm just going to take one of my spoons that I have and just scrape off the top and discard it into another pan and basically just throw it away because it's no good. And now that the slag has all been removed, I'm going to add some more of this scrap aluminum, and I'm going to make sure that I don't grab a piece that has any silicone on it, because that was pretty ridiculous and a huge waste of time. Now I'm pretty much done melting for my cast, but I wanted to throw a couple cans in the mix to entertain you guys a little bit. All right, guys, that is it for the aluminum. I don't need any more for my cast. So I'm just going to skim off a little bit of the slag from the top of the molten aluminum and pour that metal. Now, lost foam casting is so fascinating because when you pour it into the mold, it vaporizes the foam and takes its shape. Very fascinating. I know, I know. I should not have used the 5-gallon plastic bucket. But if I thought about it before and I thought this could happen, I could have just ramped up the sand to the outer edge of the container and this wouldn't have happened at all. So if I do plan on using a plastic bucket in the future, which I'm sure I will, I'm going to then ramp it because now I learned from my mistakes. So while I let this cool off, I'm going to add some more aluminum to the crucible and pour some ingots because I have time and I really want to get rid of all this scrap aluminum that I have piled in my yard. It's too bad that I didn't have more sunlight because I really would have melted the entire pile of scrap aluminum that I have. But I'm just going to have to settle for what I can do today. And this is another spot in the video where I had to mute the audio because it was loud. Also, it's smart to preheat your ingot molds before you pour molten metal into them. Because if they're cold, you could have some bad things happen. And we don't like bad things to happen. Like molten metal burning your plastic bucket. Alright, if you are still watching the video, check this little dish out. Well, large dish. I've used this a few times to pour the sand into from the lost foam casting, and it works really well. So it's been about 15 minutes and this metal should be solid. So it is now time to remove it from the mold. And I mean plastic container that I had it in. I always like to scrape it with a wire brush before actually dipping it into the water to cool it off because I really like to get a good look at it and see how well it came out. And like usual, this looks like it came out really good. Really good. I am so pleased with the way this one came out because this is probably the largest one that I've ever made, believe it or not. So I might be retiring this little piece of plastic bucket. I'm going to have to cut out another piece and maybe even possibly remount that aluminum that was there. So this is now cooled off and I'm going to go bring it over here with the 2 ingots that I made and show you guys my casting for today. Two easy to melt ingots, and I still have this large pile of aluminum that I still need to melt down. I will get to it, I promise. So I'm actually going to grab this, bring it in the garage, let it dry, and I'm going to start cleaning it up. And I'll show you how. So the easiest way for me to do it, because I don't have a whole lot of tools, I always like to place this in the vise and use a hacksaw to cut off the sprue. And the sprue is the area where the molten metal went into the pattern. You can see that right here. And yes, there are other ways of doing it, but this is the only way I have available to me. The next thing I like to do is take the wire wheel to it using my fantastic Ryobi drill. Ryobi drill is not required, any drill will work perfectly fine. I also like to use my Dremel with a smaller, more fine wire wheel, and that really helps get inside all of those little tight spots. The next thing I'm going to do is use my belt sander in this little contraption that I made here for it to sit into perfectly. I need to sand down the side where I cut off the sprue. I'm really happy I made this because I was tired of just holding the belt sander at the same time as trying to hold what I'm trying to sand. Very annoying. It's much safer to be holding your workpiece with both hands, not just one. So now I'm going to bring it back to the vise and use another sander for the face of the pattern. And then I'm going to use a little bit of elbow grease to really give it a shine. Wow, that's a beauty. Just look at the shine that my elbow grease did to this. That's incredible. Nah, you know I didn't use my elbow grease. I used some aluminum polish with my buffing wheel powered by my Ryobi grinder. Once the polishing is all done, now it's time to measure this thing, because I'm sure you want to know how big it is. And it's huge. It's like 11 and a quarter by 6 and a half, 6 and 3/4. This thing's huge. Now it's time to bring it out into the sunlight so you guys can see the shine on this beauty. You can also see that I didn't grind down the entire piece. I think leaving some of it not shiny really gives it an aged look. And the person I made it for really liked it this way. So I'm happy if he's happy.